So we've built this for a while, but because API calls were basically free, there really wasn't a good match for it. There were some good matches for it, and people would do it, but like as they were doing it, yeah, I can do it this way, but I can also do it with dollars, right? This is kind of a really interesting paradigm when it comes to AI stuff, is that there's basically like 3 or 4 different aspects of AI that make it so you cannot use credit card relationships in order to solve the monetization problems there, right? But you can with Bitcoin and Lightning as it exists today, not requiring any changes to the protocol.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to AI Unchained. This is episode 5. We have Kody Low on the show today, and I am actually, there's my dogs. I am actually away from the house and away from the studio, but I really wanted to get this. I haven't been able to stop thinking about this since we did this episode. This is a freaking amazing conversation, and I'm super excited about this episode, and I wanted to go ahead and get it out, and I realized it's going to be a week if I don't just go ahead and record. So here I am, not in the studio, and there's this dog in the background, we're going to go ahead and get into it. This is a conversation about how AI and our current payment systems, why they are not compatible, and what has changed, what is unique about this new environment, and why Bitcoin and Lightning may very well be perfectly suited to solve this problem. But I will let Cody lay out the argument for us, and we will go ahead and get right in. Really fast, I just want to say that if you're a Bitcoin saver, if you own Bitcoin, you don't actually own it unless it's behind your keys, and that's why you need to get the Cold Card hardware wallet. And you can get 9% off with code Bitcoin Audible. All one word. That's the other podcast. Bitcoin Audible gets you 9% off the Cold Card. So check it out. The link will be right there in the show notes. With that, let's go ahead and get into today's show. AI Unchained, Episode 5. Fiat Incompatible.
Cody, welcome to AI Unchained, man. It's good to have you on.
Thank you, Guy. I've been listening since you started this.
Yeah, hell yeah.
There's kind of this little community of within Bitcoin, which is already a very small enough community. There's another little community of like AI Bitcoiners, right? And like you've been very, very early for that. And so it's been fun going along this journey with you.
Nice. I'm still like a crazy novice. I'm reading through this really long piece right now. In fact, I might do it on the show. But this really long piece on like how to understand, like what is a language model? Like how would you build one from scratch? Like what's the whole neural net and everything? And it's like very simple terms. Well, ish. But it's really good. But I mean, that's where I am. I feel like I'm reading the white paper of Bitcoin, like I'm not 1,000 episodes deep, right? Like I'm at the very beginning of this, but I'm stoked. So it's a crazy space.
Well, that's something. So if I could just give 2 quick recommendations for that one, right? Like, I don't know if you know who Andre Karpathy is, but he used like part of OpenAI, part of some of the original guys at OpenAI. And then he led Facebook's, Tesla's self-driving team for like, the computer vision, right? Mm-hmm. And then he left for a little bit, and then he started just doing YouTube videos, right? Of like, hey, this is like how all of this crazy stuff in AI works. Like,
really?
Let's build mini.
Oh my God, that sounds like exactly what I need.
Like, he from scratch implements and builds GPT, right? And then he's just got.
That's awesome.
Yeah, right. It's like very
on video.
Yeah, right. And he's like doing it in a Jupyter notebook, right? And then what he's also got is he's got this very great blog, and he's actually, he's not like a Bitcoiner per se, right? But like, he's like kind of written about it a little bit. He's got one of the best pieces I've ever seen on Bitcoin, right? From the technical perspective, right?
Wow.
Because it's a from scratch implementation of Bitcoin, of that, just like writing Python code. He like from nothing makes a public key, creates an address off of it, connects to a Bitcoin node, broadcasts his transaction in order to pay himself, right? But he does it from scratch, just writing very basic Python, right? And so it's one of my best.
That's pretty amazing.
So I send him.
Yeah.
He's like a god within the AI community, right?
How do you spell the name? You said Andre
Karpathy. Yeah.
K or C?
Karpathy. And
Okay.
he's one of those
Exactly
kind of
like it sounds.
yeah, he's one of those guys where it's kind of like, oh, hey, Karpathy dropped another video. Let me stop everything that I'm doing and watch this thing. Right?
Nice.
Like just a couple days ago, or maybe a week ago, like things are moving so fast in this space, right? Is that just like a little bit ago, he did like a state of GPT, right? Kind of like a summary of like, this is where GPT was. This is where it's gone to. This was the inflection point with ChatGPT. Where are we today? Right. So
that's awesome. Do you think he would be, does he do podcast appearances? I might reach out.
Like that one.
I could bug him.
I don't know.
That'd be great to get him on to like just kind of like
he's
pick his brain. Like, what is it? You know, like explain this to me.
No, he's a very busy man. He when he left Tesla, he was like, "Hey, I just want to make videos," right? And then like a couple weeks later, he's like, "And now I'm back at OpenAI," right? But it was cool. It's this beautiful thing that he did, right? Of that, there's like 7 or 8 different of these videos, right? Of just like they're an hour and a half long. It's just him in a Jupyter notebook of like the expert on all of this stuff. Just like, but also like fundamentally, he's like a hacker, right? Like he's not like some big. I mean, he does like a bunch of academic stuff, right? But fundamentally, he's just a coder, right? And so it's so cool just being like, hey, this is how this works in my head, and let me explain it to you through a Jupyter notebook, right?
That's really cool. That's really neat. Tell me about you. Honestly, to be perfectly honest, I don't know a whole lot about Cody outside of the things that I've been following and just checking out since. I mean, I think the first time I bumped into you was with the AI stuff here. So
yeah. So
introduce me and the audience to Cody.
Yeah, so I guess like now like podcasts start, right? So we can kind of be like the obligatory intro and stuff, right? So I've been a fan of yours for a long time, right? So like long time Bitcoin Audible listener and stuff, right?
Hell yeah.
But so for me, I kind of like grew up all around the world because my mom's in the foreign service, right? So like never lived anywhere more than like 3 years at a time. So like lived all over the place, and then keep talking, and then. Then I go to college. When I'm in college, I kind of go down the finance route, right? But like, while I was there, right, I encountered Nicholas Taleb, right? Of like before he like kind of loses his mind after safety breaks it, right? And then recognize that there's a lot of problems with like the standard finance thing. And I'm like, okay, well, I thought I was going to go down the investment banking route. Like, what do I do? I don't know. Like, I'll join the Marine Corps, right? Of like, that's like a fun thing. And it's, privileged to lead Marines. Like there's nowhere else you can go where it's like, hey, I'm 21 years old, right? And like I've been training as an officer for the last it's like 9 months worth of training, right? So first you go to the basic school where you get trained as a provisional rifle platoon commander, because in the Marine Corps, every Marine are rifleman, right? And every officer has to be trained to lead a rifle platoon, right? And so even if you're going to be a JAG, like a military lawyer or a pilot or a cook or like someone sitting behind a desk or whatever, right? Like you get trained on that job. And the reason why is because the entire organization exists to support the 18-year-old leading the other 3 18-year-olds into a fighting hole, right? So insofar as you're in this organization, the reason why you're here is because you support that guy and you need to know how his job works, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so like I see that a lot within the Bitcoin community as well, right? Of that there's like a very clear mission alignment of that the most important people in the Bitcoin community are the developers, right? And so within Bitcoin, there's like this big impetus to like learn a little bit about coding, to understand like, the fact that like these open source devs are basically like, like the peak of the peak when it comes to the Bitcoin community, I think is like a huge plus for us, right? And so like, so join the Marine Corps, become an infantry officer, lead Marines, go on deployments to like Kuwait. We were a crisis response company where we were like hopping around the Middle East doing like all sorts of stuff there, right? COVID happens. And then because COVID's happening, right, is like we have these like 24-hour and 12-hour tactical operations center watches, right? And so you're stuck there basically waiting for the phone to ring, right? Because it's like, hey, my guys are going to jump on a bird. We're going to go to like Syria or something, right? And, like once COVID happens while we're on this deployment, well, the phone stops ringing mostly, right? It's like no one's really doing anything. And so, like, you've got these really long times in the Tactical Operations Center where you on these things called Nipper computers, which are unclassified computers, but they're very limited in what you can do, right? And so, it's a government computer. You can't go on social media, those kinds of things, right?
Sure.
So it's kind of this little exercise in like, what can I get access to, right? And I find that Bitcoin.org is not blocked. And so,
Hey.
intro to Bitcoin becomes that, like, I read the white paper, right? Of like, that's like, because the only resource I can get access to while I'm on these long watches and stuff. And it hit me
That's
like a
funny.
light, right?
Yeah.
And so start going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole for those ones. As I do that, kind of same philosophy of why I like the Marine Corps so much is like coming into Bitcoin, I was like, I have to learn to code. I have to become a developer. And that was about like 2.5 years ago. So then finish up active duty time, start going back to school, start getting gigs, working on Bitcoin stuff, right? And then as I kind of become more down the development track, now I'm at Fedi I'm the head of developer and product support for Fedi, right? So we can talk about Fedi at the end for this stuff. But I think I'm
fascinated by what's going on with Fedi. I mean, I know this isn't like a Bitcoin podcast, but it's hard not to talk about it.
Don't worry. There's AI going on at Fedi too. So
yeah,
we're talking about
nice.
But so I start getting into the AI stuff because the way that I learned how to code was, again, on these Nipper computers. It's a Windows computer, right? And so, like, I don't know, like, how much of your audience have like tried this, but like trying to learn how to code on a Windows computer is very, very difficult because it's using like Windows little thing, right? Instead of like an open source thing like Linux, or if you're using Mac, right? Like it's like compatible with Linux, right? Like a lot of the coding materials is all built for like not Windows, right? And also because it's a Nipper computer, can't get access to the terminal, it becomes really, really hard for me to like, I'm trying to teach myself.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I find Replit, which is an in-browser IDE that's not blocked.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, while I'm on these 12-hour watches, right, and the phone's not ringing, right, is so, like I can do there. And so, like we're, like I'm doing like the normal infantry officer stuff, right, of like we're going out, we're doing drills, we're doing ranges, we're like, hopping around to different places and stuff. But during these 12-hour watches where I'm just in the Tactical Operations Center, just like, there's nothing that we can do, right? And so I'm just like teaching myself how to code, like reading as much as I can for this stuff, right, on the stuff that I have available to. I find Replit and I'm able to just like, basically take off, right, in terms of like doing the coding stuff, right? And so I've been kind of doing that since then. And so that's how I like become technical, start developing, all that kind of stuff. Replit did this big pivot into AI, and like I'd been kind of like focused on like using them for a very long time. So I was like, hey, this is like, they're like, now is the time to start paying attention. So I was like, all right, cool. It's like as much as time as I'm spending on Bitcoin,
Where was that in the timeline? Was that pre-GPT?
That was basically when GPT came out, right?
Okay.
GPT-3 specifically, right? So GPT-3, so the Da Vinci model, right, was like when that came out, there were a lot of people who were like, I see where the puck is going and it's going to be crazy, right? So let's start skating in that direction, right? Yeah. And so we start doing that. And then for me, specifically as a Bitcoiner, I kind of start seeing this opportunity of that it's like you think about different computing paradigms as they come around. So like when like David Chaum's Chaumian eCash. So if you guys aren't familiar with this, David Chaum, he invented like Chaumian eCash, which is basically a blinded signature scheme where the mint is you're able to have like a bank where the mint doesn't know any information about its users. So it doesn't even have a concept of a user, right? There's just eCash notes, right? And so that was going to be a system that was going to be shipped with and embedded into every single Windows 95 copy that ever went out, right?
It's so crazy how close we actually came, like, to having eCash. Like, and when it was not odd to think about, like, you would have this surveillance, that it was insane to think that you have this surveillance apparatus and people wouldn't have privacy. People's interaction with money was cash, you know? And so obviously you would want this same thing in the digital realm. And it's like a bunch of like little quirks, and maybe that Chaum was just like not a good businessman, but a brilliant coder, but they were just a couple of pieces fell in the wrong direction and it just stopped. But
exactly.
Keep going with that.
You get a new computing paradigm with like the operating system, and we could have had cash there. Then you get with like e-commerce, right? Like Visa was trying to do something similar. They were like, hey, David Chaum, like all the eCash guys, right? Like you guys have a working digital payments mechanism that we don't have, right? Like let's buy you, or let's make a deal. Let's like use you guys for online commerce. Okay. So they adopt it for the digital and payments nature, right? But it just so happens that using this system, the users achieve perfect privacy, right? that could have been the way that we went. That deal ends up getting blown up. They like developed a system that they use right now where it's basically like you're through the credit card, you swipe your credit card, you give them access. Like every time you swipe your credit card, it's like giving the other person your private key, right?
It's so crazy. It's like that's one of the things that like really got me when I first heard about Bitcoin was, or one of the critical characteristics of Bitcoin that I was like, man, this is so fundamentally different, is that it's a push instead of a pull system. You make payments, you don't give people, whereas credit cards, you give access and they take payments, and you just trust that they're going to take the payment that you owe, but you just gave them the key to your whole account, basically.
Well, and this is where this ties into AI, right? Because now we have a new computing paradigm, right? And the new computing paradigm is that what previously with e-commerce you could do is you could basically amortize the cost of like most of your users through the power user, right? Is that, hey, only 10% of the people who visit my website actually pay for it. That's fine, because the cost for doing the API calls for everybody else is basically free, right? And so I can kind of amortize that across them, right? So, but now when it comes to using these AI tools, especially the stuff on the cutting edge, right? You can think about like every time you're doing like a Midjourney call, or every time that you're doing like a GPT-4 call, or any of the like really bleeding edge stuff or whatever, is you're just sitting there setting fire to a graphics card, right? And like, I can't just let someone show up and set my graphics cards on fire.
Yeah.
Is that this doesn't work anymore. So this is kind of like a new computing paradigm for this stuff. And so a lot of the stuff that we've built over the past couple of years as Lightning developers and stuff is this mechanisms where you can gate APIs with Lightning payments, right?
Yeah.
So the L402 specification, it recently was opened up as a blip by Lalu, right? So we've built this for a while, but because API calls were basically free, there really wasn't a good match for it. There were some good matches for it, and people would do it, but like as they were doing it, I can do it this way, but I can also do it with dollars, right? This is kind of a really interesting paradigm when it comes to AI stuff, is that there's basically like 3 or 4 different aspects of AI that make it so you cannot use credit card relationships in order to solve the monetization problems there, right? But you can with Bitcoin and Lightning as it exists today, not requiring any changes to the protocol, right? And so one of the cool ones that we can start with is by talking about micropayments, right? So one of the big issues that I have is that when random users show up at my site, okay, like I as a developer, I don't want to have to store a bunch of information about them, okay?
Yeah.
But if I know that I'm going to need to charge them for their use of my website, I have to store that information.
Yeah, you have to have users. You have to have the ability to recall that data. You have to build up a long-term relationship with the cookies and the situation, like the session and everything.
Long-term relationship, right? Why do I need anything past the interaction? Why can't you and I just like have a transaction and you walk away? Well, because
I can tell you how many times I would have read an FT article or a New York Times article or something if they just showed me a freaking QR code and I could zap them 50 cents. I would have read it. But every time they asked me to subscribe, nope, not doing that shit.
Well, Guy, think about it from their perspective, right? Is that for them, you read that article, right? And then 20 days later, you come back and you say, oh, hey, that was a fraudulent charge. Right. Yep. So now they pay $35 on the chargeback fee, right? And they don't get what they had originally. Right.
The monetary structure is just not set up for it because it's not worth the risk to take a $1 payment.
Yeah. So for this first aspect of AI, why I got so excited for this for Lightning, right, is because the kind of computing paradigm you can think about is that for certain types of API calls, those that are going to be using like the most cutting edge models and those kinds of things, right? So like every time you do a GPT-4 call, it costs between like 3 cents and 8 cents, right? Like every single time, right? So you're just slamming, right? And so
that's so crazy.
Like a long-term way of scaling this to everybody, giving access to like random developers who like I don't want to have to store all their information. I want to have them have privacy. I don't want to have to basically use credit cards for all this stuff. I don't want to limit it to only people who have access to credit card, which is a very small percentage of like the total like number of people who could benefit from this technology, right?
I mean, just the idea, just the scope of the unbanked. I mean, yeah
exactly, right? Is that Lightning, as it exists today, allows me to pass that cost along to my user. API calls are no longer free when they use AI. and I need a way to pass that along to the user at the time that they set my graphics card on fire.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what's really exciting for me about like the micropayments aspect of it, is that this solves a very clear and obvious problem of that you need an internet native bearer instrument that you can pay for the expenditure of the energy at the time that they do it, right? It just so happens that as a sender on Lightning, I achieve very good privacy.
Yeah.
Right? As the recipient, I don't have as good privacy. Like Tony Giorgio will like talk your ear off about this, right? Of that, like, oh, hey, you have to broadcast what your node is. Your node can be associated with your IP, all those kinds of things, right? But me as a developer hosting a website, I'm not as concerned about that, right? But I can immediately open this up and give access to any user who shows up because I'm passing the cost along to them as they use it.
Yeah.
Right? That's kind of like the first sort of really exciting AI paradigm where Fiat cannot solve this problem. Lightning can. As it exists today, as the tooling is already there for, Greenlight is like getting launched very soon. Like the LDK node is getting launched very soon.
Dude,
like,
those things are going to be crazy.
Stuff, right? Of that, like, you're going to be able to do this stuff very, very easily. And it's solving a very clear and obvious problem in a way that Fiat definitely cannot. Right.
And there's something really poetic, just the Bitcoiner in me, is there's something really poetic that you bring Bitcoin into the protocol with energy, and then you spend it directly on energy.
Yeah. Totally. Right.
Yeah.
Like, it's so exciting for this stuff. Right. So that's kind of like the first peg of this, of like the micropayments of that. Like, I want to be able to make AI in my applications, but I can't just do that in a way that I open it up to everybody. Because if somebody shows up and starts spamming it, they recognize that I'm doing a GPT-4 call on the back end, or they recognize that I'm running one of these more advanced models, right, that actually cost more, right? The moment that they recognize that, they'll start abusing it, right? And so I could wake up the next day and I have a $20,000 expense on like my tokens or whatever, right? And now, like, okay, well, I just woke up the next day and I have this expense. Well, my natural reaction to that, maybe if I'm like, you know, not as good of a person as like most people are, like maybe I'm a bad person in this example, is that I do a chargeback, or I say like, oh, hey, that was a fraud, or like, oh,
how do you
say abuse it?
You
or,
push it up the ladder. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And the problem is you can. You know, like, I mean, like, how the hell do you wake up to a $20,000 charge and you not try to figure out how to dump that on somebody else? You know, right. like you can't, like, that could end you, especially as like a startup or a small enterprise, like trying to accomplish something, and you accidentally let someone just eat through energy and through server space, like just ungodly amounts of money. Just nuts. Yeah.
And you got to pass that along to the user at the time they use it, right? And like, that's the thing that Lightning enables, and that like the L402 specification, stuff like Aperture that Lalu's been building for a while, right? Like this stuff has been around, and Lightning is ready for this, right? That's like one of the big differences, right? Like there was like a retrospective that Facebook did on, or I guess Meta now, right? On like when COVID happened, they were like, hey, this is like hand in glove opportunity for VR, and they were like, we just weren't ready for it. We weren't able to scale up production fast enough. We weren't able to take advantage of this, right? Is like Lightning as it exists today with the current infrastructure and all of the stuff that's coming out over the next couple of days and weeks, right? We're able to handle this. It's
that's
ready.
The crazy thing is it's ready.
Yeah. This is not 2018 anymore, right?
Yeah.
So that's like one really cool one, right? And so now you think about this in terms of, that's just like users generally, okay? Well, now this is like the thing that really, really got me excited, right? This is my first pass of this, is that, okay, well, the cost of doing this stuff, we can pass along to the users. But who are those users, right? Currently, they're humans. Sometimes they're bots. They're about to be mostly bots, right? So, like, you know, so I don't know if you've like done coverage of this. I think you did. I might be misremembering, but let's like kind of cover this for the beginning, right? Of like how an agent works, right? And so agents, and like I'll use this kind of like from the LangChain perspective of this stuff, right? So the way that you think about this is that when you prompt a model, the model has an input, right? Of like, there's the stuff that it was trained on, and then you input it some content, and it's using this transformer decoder architecture, right? Of that, it's looking back basically and saying, based off of the different weightings that I give to the order of the words, paying most attention to the stuff that was most recent, right? Probabilistically, what should the output look like, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of like big picture of like what's going on with this large language model, right? So you do the input, it gets the output, okay? Well, what if you take that output and you feed it back into itself, right? What if, well, then you start getting into issues where it's just basically it kind of like goes into these loops, right? But like the problem, and what this is the thing that agents have figured out, right? What if we take those outputs and we feed those into a different model, right? That is doing a different thing, right? What if you allow the model to spawn its own agents, right? So you've got an agent that spawns additional agents, right? And like their sub agents specialize on specific stuff, right? So it's like this like original orchestrator agent is running a more powerful model, but when it recognizes that like the task is like easier than something that it could do, then it can spawn off like, you know, so like something running a smaller model, it's just like purchases some compute resource and then like runs it over there or whatever, right? And so this is another place where Bitcoin is clearly and obviously the solution for this problem, right? Is that you kick off a task and you give some money to it and you allow the agent, the agent to allocate resources in order to solve those tasks for you. And so originally when I started thinking about this, I was like, okay, well, it'll have the original one. It'll purchase access to different APIs that are going to be gated by 402 payments and those kinds of things, right? But then I started working a little bit more on this. And I realized that, well, some of these models, it's pretty easy to get them to recognize the limits of their own capabilities, right? Of that, you can kind of explicitly telling it by passing it by as part of the content, right? Like one of the cool things that your audience can look up is that like you can figure out like what the system prompt is for these different models, right? So like the system prompt for GitHub Copilot is like, you are GitHub Copilot, you are an editor. These are the things that you can do. Try answering this way, right? Those kinds of things, right? And so you can do that and you can tell the model its own capabilities, right? And then when somebody asks it to do something, it can recognize its own capabilities, spawn off the things and tell it what it has access to, spawn off and do the things that it has access to, but maybe it recognizes that it can't solve this problem by itself and it uses some of its Bitcoin to go purchase a human to go do something, right? It spawns off and it makes a Replit bounty or it posts
I can't figure out how to do this, but luckily I have a Fiverr account and an API.
Yeah, right. Well, this is something that I think everybody runs into when they first start playing with language models. So they realize that like, oh, hey, it can't do math, right? And one solution for that is that you just stop using it. And that's what some people do, right? But the better solution for it is just like explain to it that it can't
Give it
do
a calculator.
Well, this is what it does: is have it write Python programs, execute the Python program, and then put the result in. Right?
You can do that right in the LLM. Yeah,
exactly. Right? It's very, very good at that. Like that's like a mind blowing thing that like once you realize and you start thinking about it this way, like the kind of perspective that I've taken on this stuff is that like at the very beginning it was like, hey, the model's very limited and like probably the model's the problem, right? At this point, when you're using some of these cutting edge stuff, the way that you should approach it is that if I can't get the model to do what I want, I'm not prompting it right. Not the model can't do it, right? Yeah. And if you come at it with that perspective, right, like a whole world opens up to you, right? Especially taking advantage of things like hallucinations, right? Especially doing things like, like using models to feed into each other, right? Stuff like that opens up. Like, for example, one of the cool things that you can do, and this is kind of like my first pass for whenever I'm using ChatGPT or anything like any of the chatbot interfaces for it, right? Is that the first thing that you should do is you should have it try to make the prompt for itself better, right? So you can have an initial prompt for it that says, you are a prompt engineer helper, you are doing these things, evaluate the prompt based on these things, like give recommendations of different ways that I could ask you the same question, right? And then have the first pass be that it's refining your prompt for itself, right? And then you use that refined prompt in order to do that. Is that the models are very, very, very good at spitting out and recognizing what their own limitations are, right? Which is very exciting.
That's so interesting.
And this is where
I've used it like that. It's funny. I've used it in that vein, but not explicitly. You know, it's like almost just kind of like slightly intuitively. Like I've found myself gravitating that way. But if I actually go into it with that framing, I can see how there's so many things that like I kind of like ran into a wall on that I didn't necessarily have to run into a wall on. You know? Yeah.
Well, one of the really nice things about it too is that once you get like a good prompt and like a good persona and stuff and something that you're more comfortable interacting with, and you can kind of like prompt them as part of, so just like for clarification, right? So like the way that a lot of these chatbots work is that you have an initial system prompt, right? And the system prompt is basically setting the persona for what you're interacting with, right? And so if you're using ChatGPT, the system prompt might be something like, you are ChatGPT, a large language model trained by OpenAI, respond to the user using Markdown, right? And so then it will like output Markdown because you told it what you were trying to do there, right? But you could change that system prompt and you could say, hey, you are William Shatner, you are an actor, and respond using the same inflections and voice that he would, right? And so the way that these models work, right, is like you have that system prompt, and if you get a good system prompt and something that does the way you want, you can reuse those, right? And so basically you should have like a library of little prompts that are like very, very good. So for example, every time that I know that I'm going to be like working with Rust code or whatever, I have like very specific things that I want the model to be able to do when I'm coding in Rust that I'm more concerned with than if I'm coding in something like Python, right? Mm-hmm. So the system prompts that I do are different for those. So I still ask the same questions. I still do the same errors inputting there. But like the context that I'm focusing on, you can kind of think about it as like the system prompt is like how it should act and how it should focus or whatever. Mm-hmm. Is that like, that's the thing that you really want to get good at, because once you get good at it, well, now I can just reuse this in the future, right? And so now I have like a system prompt that's like a copy editor. Now I have one that's a debater, right? So like if I think of something, that I know that I can use this system prompt to get the model to argue with me, for example, right?
Do you have like a collection?
Yeah, totally. Haven't sent it.
Okay.
Yeah. So
yeah, dude. Yeah.
The guy who's been doing the best research on this is Brian Rommel, right? So Brian Rommel, he's been very early. He was the first guy who figured out how to get GPT to play.
Brian Rommel.
Right?
Brian. How do you spell that name?
Brian, Roemmele or something. I think something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, we can get it in the show notes.
It's close enough that I can probably find it.
Yeah.
I'll ask ChatGPT.
Yeah, right? But like this is the stuff where he's been doing the very, very cutting edge research on this stuff, right? In terms of like he calls them super prompts, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's basically like he was the guy who came up with like Dennis, right? Or I don't know if you know about Dan. Like Dan was a thing where it's like do anything now, right? Where you can get GPT to do it.
Yeah.
Dennis is sort of a way where like Dan was kind of like, you can get it to say swear words and stuff. That's not very interesting. Like Dennis is a like system of prompts that he was using in order to get it to like hallucinate, right? Mm-hmm. Take advantage of the hallucinations and stuff that it's inventing things that don't exist, right? But just like, okay, well now I can use that in creative ways, right? That sort of thing. Right?
That's crazy. It's funny. I've like going into this, especially with like all the noise and all the BS around AI, is like all the 10 newest AI tools and all the threads, and where like half of the accounts are obviously run by AI, and doing that same like gotcha or clickbait crap. I really thought of prompting courses and like the idea of, I thought of it as like totally gimmicky. And the more I'm in it, the more I'm like, man, I need, like, I'm building a prompt collection, and like I'm thinking about this, like, oh no, this is like really, really important to have, like, make sure you can give it this, like you're kind of setting up its perspective almost, or its little world in how you want it to behave and what you want it to understand for itself. Like how does it reflect, so to speak, on what it is giving you? I'm less of a definitely click away and think it's all bullshit if I see a prompting instructions or tutorial or something.
Yeah. Well, this is something that has been very cool, is just as it applies to coding, right? So, for example, one of the really, really cool things that I've been working a lot with like Replit on these things, right? And like I've been like tracking a lot of stuff that they've been doing. And they just released their large language model it's called like Replit LM, right? And it's like a 3 billion parameter model. On fine tuning, like after fine tuning, it performs very, very well. They had like
it's open source.
Yeah, totally open source, right?
Oh,
and so
hell yeah. Can I plug it into GPT for all?
Yes, I think so. I know that Prem supports it. So Prem AI, which is a Tierra's company, right? But
let me interrupt you real quick. Hold that thought. You got it? You know where we're going to go back to?
Yeah.
Okay. What is? I am still very much in my exploration phase of all this, right? So what are you using on your computer? Do you have any local, like kind of self-hosted stuff that you swear by?
Yeah. So I use GPT for all.
Okay.
Right.
GPT
so that's
for
one
all
that I use. And then I also, the ones that, so mostly my code editor is Replit, right? And so that's like, running in a Docker container, right? So that's hosted by them, right?
Yeah.
But like they open source their model, and so like you can do stuff like fine tune it through Hugging Face, right? Or you can like run it locally, right? So Prem AI is another one. So GPT for all and Prem AI, they're kind of doing the best versions of like running this stuff locally, right?
Okay.
Prem's the big one, right? Sorry,
Prem
GPT for all, but
AI.
then Prem's the big one. It's also run by some some pretty serious Bitcoiners, right? And so
Okay.
you're going to see like some cool Lightning integrations and stuff coming out of that.
God, I have so many links for this show. I gotta
And
remember.
they're going to be
that.
co-sponsoring the hackathon that we're running for the next month, right?
Oh, snap. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So is that, and then can I put it back?
Go right back. Go right back. I just want to interrupt and do that real quick.
Yeah. So basically the thing that they did, right, is that they trained the large language model over code, right? Mm-hmm. And an emergent behavior from that was that it could do English, right? Is that they're training it over code, and it's like, yeah, sure, it's got some examples of English and like the small content comments and stuff or whatever, right? But it's not like they had to train the model over all of the English corpus of language or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like they're training it on code, and so it's mostly code, but there's some English in there, right?
Just
and the way
commented
that-
out blocks and stuff.
Yeah, right. Like comment blocks, those kinds of things, some documentation, that sort of stuff, right? But like the thing that they weren't trying to teach it English, right? They were trying to teach it to code, and it just so happens they can also write English, right? And so don't think about it as like it's like a live thing or whatever, even though it can like reliably pass the
Oh
Turing.
my God, it's conscious.
Yeah, even though like it can reliably pass the Turing test for most people or whatever, right? But the thing to think about it for it, right, is that like coding is just formalized logic, right? Is that like kind of in the same way that I was talking about, like, hey, models are at the point where it's like, if it's not doing what you want, you're not expressing yourself correctly. Coding is the exact same way, right? Is that the computer is always right. The computer is doing exactly what you tell it to, right? But for like maybe like compiler errors and like that, right? But like generally speaking, is that the process of coding is learning to formalize and express yourself through logical language, right?
Yeah.
And so there's like different layers of that in terms of its abstraction, right? So it's like, hey, you get all the way down to machine code, or you put it in assembly, or you put it in C, or you put it in Python, or whatever, right? But then like a higher level than Python is like normal English language, right? And so that's one of the things that's super exciting about this stuff, right? Is that in terms of the capabilities of the models, right? Is that you teach it to code, you teach it, like you train it over that stuff, right? It just so happens to also learn English, and the way that it expresses itself is very logically, right? Because the stuff that it was trained over was code, right? Which is the expression of what you want through formalized language.
Yeah.
Right?
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
So crazy. And it just moves, and I say this every freaking episode, but it moves so fast. Like the new models, like, and there's probably going to be, like, I feel like there still needs to be, like standards have just kind of been like haphazard. Like it's just like people are, it's being built so fast that everything, it's like Legos where all the shapes and the sizes are just different. And there seems to be such a huge challenge in figuring out how to plug these things together. Like, and everybody wants to use it. I use as my personal experience is the Falcon model dropped and, went to the top of the leaderboards in Hugging Face. I can't figure out how to use it. I cannot figure out how to make use of it. It won't plug into GPT for all. If I don't have an easy interface for it, like, I'm just like, son of a bitch.
Here's the kind of tie back into Bitcoin as we're doing this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Is that one of the cool things, one of the things about it is like, yes, absolutely, these things are going to become scalable and it's going to be easy to use and all this kind of stuff, right? But it's like, the thing that you're kind of missing, I think that you're asking for, right, is that like I want like an out of the box, this Falcon model works and I want to be able to play with it, right?
Yeah.
And the problem is like that costs money, and it's like back to this kind of computing paradigm is that people can't just like deploy that for you and be like, hey, use it as much as you want, right?
Yeah.
They need a way to pass that along. And so I think that Bitcoin is going to help a lot with that, right? Is that now once you're able to pass these compute costs off, well, then I can get like a working version of the most recent model with the large parameters that actually cost me like 1 cent in order to run or whatever, right? And I can open that up to everybody, because currently the way that they do it is basically like either like give me your credit card or bring your own API key, right? And then you incur the expenses, not me. Right. And so that's fine if you want to limit it to like, developers in the San Francisco Bay Area, right, who are like, but like if you want to give the access to everybody for this, and this is why we're doing this hackathon for the next month called AI for All, right, is that like the Bitcoin becomes a scaling solution for all of these stuff, right? Because like API calls are no longer free. And so if I don't just want it to be like my friends and family and like people in developed countries with credit cards and like a significant computer experience in order to use their own API keys and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just think about the opening, like the scope of the audience. Like you're just like so like it's like there's like 1,000 walls and they all just vanish as soon as this thing's plugged into Bitcoin and Lightning.
Well, here's the other one, right? Is that when you say there's like 1,000 walls for these things, right? Is that the stuff that we've talked about so far is about like the users, right?
Yeah.
But like, what if most of the people who are interacting with what you're doing are not users, they're agents, right? So like the experience that you have is that you see like a normal user and you're not going to be able to distinguish between them, right? Like they're going to get good. And so the only way that you're going to be able to do that, because the like what Paul likes to say, Paul Itoy from Stackwork, who's been doing like some of the best work on this, right? He's like absolutely far and away like the furthest along in terms of like bridging Bitcoin and AI through the stuff that he's been doing at Stack, right? Is that for as identity and content approaches infinity, that's going to come up against the absolute scarcity of Bitcoin, right? And so Bitcoin, through its finite supply, its absolute scarcity, which is representation of like energy and time, right? That's going to be the gating mechanism as content and identity approach infinity, right? There's going to be an infinite number of things interacting with my website. There's going to be users, there's going to be their agents, there's going to be the agents, there's going to be all these sorts of stuff, right? Is that I need to be able to gate that somehow. And the way that I'm going to have to gate it is with some sort of finite resource, something that's a bearer instrument that can be passed over a communications channel, something that can be passed as part of the data.
I wish we had something like that.
Right? And so, yeah, this is like a match made in heaven, right? And so that's what's very exciting. And so this hackathon that we're doing for the next month, right? Like this is because I've been like in this San Francisco AI scene, right? Because I just happen to live here, right? So like, you know, like luckily for me, like, you know, everybody was like, oh, hey, is San Francisco back or not, right? It's like with AI, like San Francisco is back, right? It's like all this stuff is coming out from this area, right? Is that I've been going around and being like going to hackathons, going to meetings, all these kinds of things, right? And I'm like, hey, Bitcoin is the solution to all these problems. And the reaction that I'm getting back is show me, right? And so AI for All, our hackathon for the next month, is our show you, right? Is that like
tell me more about this. Like, we haven't really hit it yet. So like give me the pitch for the hackathon. Like get anybody who's listening to this, why should they check out? Why should they be a part of it? Give me the pitch.
Yeah, so like the pitch for this, right, is that this is like kind of just what we've been talking about so far, right? Is that AI has this clear and present need for something to do that is a bearer instrument that can be passed over the internet, so you can pass along the usage cost of your models, of your AI endpoints to the user as they use it, right? Chargebacks are absolutely rampant for everybody who's doing this stuff, right? It's like, this is why everybody's relying on Stripe for it, because Stripe is the only person with the infrastructure to handle this degree and level of chargebacks, right? Yeah. And so this is like kind of the same way, and we can talk about Fedi and Fediment later, right? Of like, hey, you've got like the first party custody and the third party custody. Currently, you've got like first party models, stuff that relies on people to be very technically proficient, to have like relatively powerful computers, those kinds of things. Or the third party model. And if you're going to do the third party model, they're going to have to gate it with something like Stripe, right? That's what they're doing right now. But that is not a good fit for this, right? And the reason why it's not a good fit is because of what we talked about. Of that, you have to pass the cost along to the user as they use it. That's not possible with a debt relationship, right? So I can't just like, hey, you use this for 25 minutes or whatever, right? Because the moment I figure out I can use it for 25 minutes, I spawn 700 different agents and all of them use it for 25 minutes, right? Yeah. Like, you need to be able to gate this stuff, right? You need to be able to pass the cost to the user.
That's really one of the crazy things is it's not even just that all these users can, pop up or whatnot. It's the fact that AI is scalable fake users.
Yep.
Like is that the very tool that you're trying to gate is literally the nail in the coffin to even trying to use this with credit cards. When you can live video fake a person and fake an ID. I mean, like the stuff you're doing, even with just stability, like or stable XL and stuff, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy what you can do with it now. And 6 months ago, it was damn near night and day. It's so, you can't have, like, I feel like the age of KYC and like identification of people online, all of our identification methods at a distance don't work. They don't work in this new world.
I mean, this is like a big one, right? Where I had like a conversation with a couple guys, engineers at one of the larger AI companies, and their reaction was, hey, why aren't you opening this up to everybody? And it's like, well, it can reliably solve CAPTCHAs every single time. And so we are concerned if we open this up.
Because we have no, are you a robot?
Yeah, right. And so this is just like you were saying, right? Of that, like, you need something to gate this. You need something that can't be gamed that way, right? And like the solution for that is sats, right? There's like the only finite resource in existence, right? Besides time, I guess, right? But,
It's a translation, right? And Bitcoin just translates time to energy.
Yeah. So maybe let's talk about, so this is kind of another perspective on like this AI stuff, right? That I think has been useful that, I'm not sure entirely where I first heard it. I think it might've been Obi, right? Obi Noah, CCO of Fedi, sorry. So you can kind of think about like when you have a problem of that, you run the model locally on your phone or whatever it is, right? But that's not going to be the most powerful, but it's going to have access to the most information for it, right? Yeah. As the model can't solve the problem, it recognizes it needs more powerful things, right? It needs to go further away from you. It needs to pay for somebody else to do something. It strips out the privately identifiable information, right? And then it provides, as you get further and further away, less and less and less about you. But it's using the more powerful model in order to solve the aspects of it that it can't solve itself, right? Yeah. And so as we kind of talk about this, right, there's like first-party custody and then there's third-party custody, right? Is that within Fedi, and why I was saying like, hey, Fedi is like doing a lot on AI, and why Fedi is like the organizer and like we're doing this big hackathon for the next month focused on Bitcoin and AI, is because in the same way that there's this second-party design space between first-party custody and third-party custody when it comes to Bitcoin that Fedi is exploring in terms of federations of different sizes and like what we call in the federated operating system to orchestrate the applications, data, and your digital life across those different ones, right? In the same way, models, there's this second-party design space for it, right? Of that you can't solve it locally, so you try to run it on your computer. Can't run it on your computer. Instead of having to go all the way to OpenAI, what if my community is running a GPU cluster that I can run locally there? And I know that my data is not going to go outside of there. I know that that's where it stops. It's already a trusted, established relationship that I have there. So that's something that I've done some preliminary work on, and I really hope someone during the hackathon kind of like expands on it, right? Is like running federated hosted models, which are going to be resources, which are going to be much larger than what you can run personally, but doesn't have to go all the way to a third party. Right.
Is when they have in that sort of a situation, do people still have to basically be running web facing servers? Because you can't run this sort of thing over Tor.
Well, you don't have to use Tor. I mean, you could run it over Tor. It'd just be like to have some latency issues, right?
I mean it in the sense that I don't mean it in the sense of like Tor being like, oh, you need privacy necessarily, but just that. How do you get a whole bunch of computers to connect if, like, let's say, like, I'm at home on my computer trying to contribute to this because I got a, 3090 and, like, I would like to be a part of this and I would like to receive some Lightning payments. How do you solve the connection problem? Do you use something like Hypercore?
There's a couple different ways you can do it, and just using so basically there's like two levels to that, right? So it's like, how do you get like the federated aspect of it, right? And like what I've been working on for a while, and that I think is the best solution for this is Fedimint, right? So Fedimint, the protocol of, there's like 3 default modules that come with it. So it's got a module system, right? Where basically, let's say that Bitcoin transactions have like inputs and outputs. Fedimint transactions have inputs and outputs, and you can add modular functionality to it such that the inputs do different things and the outputs do different things, right? So the default modules of Fedimint are eCash, Lightning, Bitcoin, right? Yeah. And so you can have a peg in, for example, is an input of Bitcoin and an output of eCash. A normal Lightning transfer, for example, right, is that, the input is eCash, the output is execution of like an escrow for the Lightning invoice that you're trying to do, right? Yeah. So that's what you have at the beginning. Well, now you can do, okay, I have a Lightning payment, and then the output of that is like the creation of an API key, which is then like given to somebody within the community, which gives access to the resource that like the community is hosting on behalf of, that the Federation is hosting on behalf of the community, right? And so in terms of like the orchestration that you're talking about in terms of your GPU with everybody else's, right? Like this is already something that a lot of people are working on in terms of like federated training, federated model hosting, those kinds of things, right? Is that like the stuff that I started on and I hope people really continue with, right? Is like using the Fedimint, which is already doing custody of Bitcoin, to do custody of other data, right? To do like stuff like password management, API key management, those kinds of things. So like on behalf of the community, you can run those gated access.
Oh shit! Everybody's got a seed.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Because that's the kind of thing. So like maybe let's switch over to Fedimint for a little bit, right? And so
let's dive down that rabbit hole.
Fedimint is like the open source protocol, which is Chaumian eCash on Bitcoin, is what it started off as, right? So Eric Sirian, when he first came up with Fedimint, is that he saw Liquid and he said, this doesn't necessarily need a blockchain, and there's this cool like blinded signatures technology that you can use in order to do eCash. But the problem with eCash is that you have to trust the mint. So let's federate the mint. Right?
Yeah.
It's kind of his solution for this one, right? So it's a privacy solution and a scaling solution for Bitcoin, okay? But what does it mean to own Bitcoin, right? Like to own Bitcoin is to know the private keys. Fundamentally, it's about data management, okay? Mm-hmm. And so if you're going to be doing that, so for managing like private keys, well, maybe you could also do a Fedimint module that's doing a password manager, right? And so if you're going to be doing password managers, you can do API key management is what I'm working on, right? In terms of like being able to gate access to GPUs and those kinds of things. Right. And so what starts off as just this community custody protocol becomes this whole mechanism for running any sort of federated application. Right. Is like what Fedimint has kind of evolved into through this module system. Right.
That's
and
crazy.
So when you first start with Fedimint, right? So like, I don't know, like how, like stop me if I'm going too deep down the Bitcoin side of things, because I know this is like AI Unchained focused, right? But
yeah,
you arrive back at like the AI on the Federation side or whatever when you start with this assumptions, right? So currently within Bitcoin, there's like third-party custody basically and first-party custody, right? And so everybody's kind of scaling, like coming online with the third-party custody, right? Because they just don't want to have to deal with it themselves. But so, you know, like they go to Swan, they read everything. They like say, okay, well, I know I can't just keep it on here. I want to put it onto like, I want to take self-custody. I get a cold card, those kinds of things, right? Mm-hmm. So, well, now this is like a very important point. Any self-custody solution in Bitcoin, resilient to you having an accident, implies a threshold recovery mechanism that can be made outside yourself, right? Okay, and so very, very important there of like the gold standard right now, or the Bitcoin standard for this, is that you have a threshold multi-sig backup solution, right? That's what everybody says. But okay, well, if you have a threshold backup multi-sig mechanism, you're trusting those people involved in that threshold multi-sig to like not steal your funds, right? And so you keep those as people close to you. This is like the second party custody idea, right? Where there's third party, where there's no relationship to you, you're just paying them. There's first party where you're doing it yourself.
Just real quick for our non-Bitcoin audience, is just talking about having multiple keys to get access to the coin. So like imagine if, you have like a really long password and you give a third of it to your brother and a third of it to your mom, and then you keep a third of it, and you only need 2 of those pieces to get back into the account, like it's exactly. A 2 of 3 or something like that.
Exactly. Right. And so like the problem there becomes, right. And this is like why you want to keep it to second party custody of people with a trusted relationship with you, is that the benefit of this is that in the event that you have an accident, they can recover your coins, for example. Right. Mm-hmm. But so now we kind of take this and say, okay, well, everybody has this same problem, right? Everybody needs a mechanism to have a threshold backup recovery thing, and everybody needs it to be close enough in their community that they can trust them not to recover the coins while they're still alive, for example. Yeah. Right. And so now you say, okay, well, let's formalize that relationship where me, my wife, my family, like my local family, like people who are part of like my larger diaspora of like people, I don't know, like me, I'm part of like a bunch of military communities, right? So like maybe I like have this same problem with everybody there. We formalize that relationship through the establishment of a Byzantine fault tolerant distributed consensus protocol, right? And so now in a formal relationship, we say, okay, well now this is the mechanism that we have for this. This is explicitly what we're trusting in order to manage this, the custodial aspect of this. And the benefits of this is that now you have a federated consensus mechanism where it is trusted, but you're trust minimizing by doing the federation aspect of it, not just putting it all in like a single person right? And fundamentally what they're doing is they're managing Bitcoin, which is just managing data. And so now you have all of the primitives that you need in order to manage other data, right? That's kind of the big idea. Yeah. And so,
It's funny, you ended up like accidentally solving a number of other really important problems. Like it's so much
Bitcoin adoption, custodying Bitcoin, right? Yeah. Is that Fedi and Fedimint do for custody what Lightning did for payments. Yeah. Right? Is that there's this kind of like dichotomy between like first party custody, the third party custody. There's this whole environment in the middle, this design space of second party custody. And the same thing when it applies to AI models, right? Of that there's what I run locally on my computer, and then there's like the giant sledgehammer of GPT-4, right?
Yeah.
And there's this whole design space in the middle, which is growing like crazy. But the problem right now is that it doesn't have a ready monetization mechanism for people to start using. And that's what we think that AI and Bitcoin coming together can solve, is that now that you have an orchestration mechanism like a monetization mechanism that works for all of these things, where I can put up an AI stuff as part of my web app and not just like have somebody figure that out and start spamming me. Because if they're spamming me, it's like the same concept of like the orange check mark that like Michael Saylor and Gigi like to talk about, right? That it's like, hey, I'm gating this stuff with sats. It's like, that's okay. There's no such thing as spam at this point, because like when you use my website and when you're slamming my AI model, you're paying me as you're doing it, right?
Yeah.
And so I can immediately open up.
There's no such thing as spam. Like it's just being paid for.
Well, there's still going to be spam. It's going to be the stuff that you don't pay for, right? Yeah. It's going to be 999 million like AI agents or whatever who are always trying to get your attention all the time, generating content and stuff or whatever, right? But it's going to get to the point where in order for them to get your attention as a real person, they're going to have to pay you, right? It's going to be a small payment. It's going to be tiny, right? But like as content and identity
scales quick,
infinity, you have to gate it with something that's a finite resource, something that it can't just like exponentially increase the size of, right?
Yeah. It's so, there's so many of these are like really localizing forces that I don't think people are recognizing. Like at the exact same time that kind of the centralized architecture is forcing risk to pull together, to just keep batching risk in bigger and bigger pools in like the kind of financial system and the political sphere. And like essentially we're aggressively re-centralizing every single time to bail out the problems that we have. But all we do is just make the risk bigger, right? We're just pooling into a bigger, like, we're not all dead yet, but we're all going to die at the same time. And we're going to make damn sure of it. Sort of thing, especially with the banking system. But there are so many of these forces that are taking place that are aggressive decentralizers. They destroy this kind of unnatural incentive to make everything as big as possible and basically suck up resources in the financial system, because and AI, it feels like one of those forces too, specifically because the financial system, the way that we think of users and payments and control, like this permissioned financial access or financial system, it can't, if you can't verify the existence of a person from 3,000 miles away, the thing just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like, and we are moving very fast into a space where you can't do that. Like in 6 months to 2 years, how will you trust a video, an audio connection to somebody, a picture of an ID? Like, how can that bank know that you're a real person if you didn't physically go into the bank and set up and then have a permissioned person give you access, and God forbid you have to reset your password? What do you have to do to reprove that you're human again, that it's not a bot doing this? You can't have a conversation and suggest. You can't use your place of birth or where you were in third grade, because all that shit's on Facebook, and all that shit's on the internet now. And an AI with a couple of clever agents can find all of that information. And you can't. There's no captchas. I don't know how you solve that problem outside of just abandoning a technology that just doesn't work in the world anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you solve it with Bitcoin, right?
You solve it with Bitcoin. That's exactly right.
Yeah, right. Like this is one of the things that I'm sure you've heard other people say this before, right? But I'll say it again, is that one of the things that makes this really exciting as it applies to this is that there's a lot of stuff that we've been doing in Bitcoin development where it's just like, money is just money, right? And so all of the like marketing things that they do from the Web3 side or whatever, right? And like for us, we kind of reply back just like, whatever you're doing with money, Bitcoin can do too. right?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, yeah.
but then they're like, okay, well now you have this cold start problem a little bit, right? And in terms of like, how do you get to the point for this stuff? AI and just like all of where this is going or whatever is such a clear match for a use of a specific type of money, which is a bearer instrument that can be passed over a communications channel that cannot be printed. That what's called like it is a clear
With
match.
ultimate finality, yeah.
Exactly, right? Is that like this is just such a clear application of a specific type of money, which is Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why it's so exciting to be building on this stuff. Right.
And what's funny is it's not an application. It's not one application. It's the idea of an entire scope of an application space that can only be accomplished by this one thing.
Exactly. Right.
You know,
and
like AI is not an application. AI is an interface and a process of interacting with literally all conceptions of applications in a completely new way, which is crazy because, you know, go back 3 years. Like, who the hell is going to be doing anything? And go 3 years forward. Who the hell is going to be doing anything without an AI in the process?
Yeah,
like how could you possibly survive or be productive enough if you're not utilizing these things?
Yeah,
I use every day now.
Yeah, and also just like again, remember like the framework for approaching this stuff, right? Is that like we're at the point now where if you can't get the AI to help you and do what you want in some way, the way you should be approaching that is that I'm the problem, not the model, right? Yeah. That I just need to get better at the way that I'm interacting with this thing, right? And so in this way, just like you're saying, right, is that like this is going to take over everything, right? In terms of like everything that you have right now, in the same way that we like to say like, oh, hey, like take everything that you do right now and just add Bitcoin, it's better, right? And that like in this exact same way of that, like everything that you're doing right now, just add AI and it's better, right? You're more effective as a programmer. Like I've gotten enormously more productive just like by using these tools and stuff, right?
I became a programmer. I don't know how to program shit. I am now.
Well, that's what I keep recommending for people, right? Because like I was talking about in terms of this culture in Bitcoin that's like it's just starting to get there, and I think that it's going to continue, right? I think it's one of the things that really distinguishes us as a community from like the more Web3 focused things, right? That's more focused on like marketing and stuff. Is that like every Bitcoiner a developer, right? Of that like the people who are most important in this industry are the open source developers, and learning what they do and participating in what they do has never been easier. Right?
Yeah.
Is that using these AI assistants and stuff, you as somebody who just like can clearly articulate your thoughts can get to the point where you can get models to do what you want, and you can output and produce code, and you can output and produce product. You can build things, right? It's like hugely impactful and hugely important, right? But like the solution for this, right, is that like, yeah, we're talking about kind of the individual level for this stuff, but in order for people to operate at scale, you need some sort of value transfer mechanism, and the value transfer mechanism is Lightning as it exists today, not requiring any changes, right? That's the big like unlock.
Yeah. So what's the scope of the hackathon exactly? Are you asking for, or like what are the parameters? What do you want people building?
Yep. So there's like an overall prize, right? And so there's going to be an overall prize, like first, second, third, those things. And then there's also tracks specifically, right? And so we've got one for machine payments, we've got one for privacy, we've got one for Bitcoin education specifically, right? Of like in terms of orange pilling, like there's incredible opportunities in order to use AI in order to like do that at scale, right? And so like we're really interested in seeing that as well, right? And then like there's also going to be some stuff on like AI gaming, right? In terms of like, hey, like as you inject AI into games, right? Like a lot of the stuff that Zebedee's been working on too, right? In terms of like, hey, using Bitcoin as like the orchestration layer for these things in terms of the value transfer protocol across the internet, right? And so like you can either do something like Bitcoin specific or AI specific. Like we're really excited to see like the intersection of those two. It's just because this is not like one of those like I've been to some of these Web3 hackathons, right? Where it's like, hey, you feel like you're forcing it, right? In terms of like, oh, hey, we're gonna put real estate on the blockchain or whatever, right? Of like, it's like,
okay.
Not like kind of like a do your own research, right? Of like it takes like 5 minutes to figure out why that's not a very good idea, right?
Yeah.
But like as it applies to AI or whatever, like we don't want to force this down anybody's throat. Like just like build on AI, build on Bitcoin, but we really think that there's this incredible opportunity for intersecting the two. And so a lot of the workshops and stuff that we're going to be doing is going to be how do you apply the L402 specification to existing AI applications? So take the stuff that people are currently
L402 for the audience that doesn't know. I haven't even covered it on Bitcoin Audible yet.
Yeah,
give me a short breakdown. No, you're fine.
So the L402 specification is based off of in HTTP hypertext transfer protocol, right? So there's basically like the web stack, right? Within HTTP, there's a reserved status code. So you've probably seen like a 404 error before, right? So that's for the resource you asked for through this web protocol has not been found. So it returns back an error 404 not found, right? There's a reserved status code called 402. And a 402 is payment required. And if you currently go look at like the Mozilla documentation for it, it says like reserved for future use. This is an experimental code, right? The reason why was because
Been there for ever.
when they were first making the internet, they knew that you would wanted to do value transfer, right? But until Satoshi solved it, there wasn't a mechanism for doing value transfer over the internet natively, right? Now that we've solved that, well, we can use that status code, okay? And so basically, so this is kind of like developer focused.
It was parked just waiting for us.
Exactly. Is that the kind of interaction that we're going to have is that you try to use an AI resource, it returns back a 402 payment required error, and in the header of that thing is a Lightning invoice. And so you pay that Lightning invoice, which is an instant finally settled payment, and then you provide the proof that you paid it, and then it gives you the resource, right? So like in the user experience of this stuff, just doing this one round trip is like, it doesn't get in the way of the user experience. And that's one of the things that's super exciting about this and why Lightning specifically solves this problem, right? Because all the blockchains that say, oh, hey, we're like Bitcoin, but faster, right? Well, are you an instant finally settled payment layer, right? Or do you still require confirmation?
Can you scale to millions of transactions?
Exactly. Right. And so that's really going to be the focus for it, right? Of like taking a bunch of AI builders, taking a bunch of Bitcoin builders, seeing how we can apply across these things, right? And giving access to resources and tools that people are going to be able to use in order to make it super, super easy, right?
Dude, the next Arcane research report for Lightning, like you think about it, you open up one or two of these things and find like a solid use case or just like a solid product. We're talking about overloading Lightning nodes like that. You know what I mean? Like we'll go from 0 to 100 so fast.
Well, let me just show you like some specific stuff that we're going to do for this one, right? So like Voltage is going to allow people who are signing up for the hackathon, they're going to give let them get deals on doing a mainnet node access, right? Like Greenlight, as we're doing some workshops on how to use Greenlight and getting some API key access for that one. So if you want to use Greenlight for it, for doing the backend for it. And then one of the workshops I'm doing is just how to take a core Lightning node, right? And just run it out of a REPL, run it out of whatever you want to run it on, because what you're doing is, so on Replit, right? So is that just using REPL?
Oh, is it like a Docker thing?
Yeah, kind of, right? And so like basically have a bunch of different options for the ways that people can interact with Lightning. Because like for us, it's like, I mean, on the Fedi side too, right? Is that like for getting people using Lightning or whatever, like we think that there's like a very good solution for many different communities, right? Which is this second party custody solution, right? But like, okay, well now we're also going to give some options for if you want to run a node yourself, right? Like this is like the way that you would do it. If you want to use like some of these services or like Albi, for example, like Boomi is going to be doing some workshops and stuff like that, right? If you want to use them, like also great too, right? But like this is a clear and present example. Like one of the things we're talking about, right? Of David Chom and like Chami Nikesh getting in the way of the deal and closing it, right? Is that like for Fedi, the way that we think about things is that if Bitcoin wins, everybody wins, right? Yeah. Is that we're at this stage right now where it's not that everybody should be using Fedi for solving these problems. It's that Fedi is a solution like within the space of everybody should be using Lightning and Bitcoin to solve these problems, right? Yeah. So super excited to have like involvement of so many different parts of the like Bitcoin and AI communities as part of this hackathon, right? So,
dude, that's so crazy. I didn't even know how many people were involved. I didn't know Greenlight and Voltage. And what has Zebedee been doing? Do you know details on that? I haven't heard anything about them, or at least I haven't dug into anything. Are they using?
Join the hackathon.
Join the hackathon. Oh man,
tons of cool stuff. So,
hell yeah. Well, how is as a spectator? What you join the hackathon? Like what does that mean? How do I keep up? Is there going to be like feeds, so breakdowns of stuff?
Yep. We've got a Discord. We're going to be organizing stuff. We're going to be pushing stuff through Twitter. We're going to be doing like all the
send me an invite.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So we're going to be doing all the workshops are going to be run through Replit. And one of the nice things about Replit, right, and this is one of the reasons why I really, really am excited to be working with these guys and why I've been focused on them for so long, is that there's millions of developers who are about to come online who want to be able to code, right? And they're primarily going to be coding on mobile phones, right? Yeah. And Replit is the only guy in town who's going after those developers and saying, we're going to build a browser-based IDE so that you can run this on a phone. Right.
Ooh, that's great.
I know. Is that
that's smart?
for any developer out there, right, is that like you can get like a full Unix shell with like, it's got like everything that AI's got, right? And this is kind of like another thing of like applying AI. Why they were so early to this is because they wanted to go after the mobile developers, right? And the mobile developers, you're not going to sit there and type in on your phone everything. You need AI.
You need an interface. You need a language model.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And so they're the only game in town who's been going after that. So all the workshops and stuff that we do that go hosted through Replit, if you're just running on a phone, you'll be able to run the same code that they do wherever you are. If you're like a 14-year-old developer in India who's like got this, or you're like in one of these global South communities that like Fedi's going to be rolling out in, or like anybody who's like kind of like underserved right now who can't get access to the stuff happening in San Francisco because they either don't have credit cards or they live in a country where they can't satisfy the KYC requirements or anything like that. Bitcoin is the way to orchestrate access for all of those people to all of the crazy cool stuff happening over here, right? Because the reason why you can't scale this stuff to everybody else is because you have this fundamental monetization problem, right?
Yeah.
That Bitcoin solves. And when you solve that, you can bring AI to the rest of the world, right? That's why it's called AI for All, the hackathon.
Yeah. Dude, one of the things that just popped in my head while we've been talking about this is that, so many people for long spans of time, especially as we just kind of explode in the number of devices and the variety of devices that we have on the internet, is the scope of idle resources that are always just available. This is exactly the sort of thing when you can actually build up a user base and you can attack, like you have like a very strong network effect and like a value mechanism to pull people into it. And you can basically directly pay for computer resources regardless of its origin, irrespective of where it is. This is exactly what unlocks all of those. I mean, the GPUs that I just bought for the AI machine, that thing will never not be running. If I can take a lightning payment, spend 5 cents in energy and get an 8 cent lightning payment, I would never turn it off. It's income.
Totally. And this is like, I mean, just kind of bringing this to like all the things that Bitcoin has been solving on this one or whatever. The same monetization problem that AI is having is the same thing that Bitcoin has been solving in energy. And this is why we're so ready for this, because we've been solving it on the energy architecture part, right? Yeah. In terms of like 30% of all energy is either idle or wasted, right? Yeah. So Bitcoin on the base layer,
Bitcoin eats
the Lightning aspect, has been doing this. Lightning developers have been seeing that happening, and like all the Lightning developers, like Bitcoin developers are like the most educated energy policy and like energy usage of any group of developers anywhere. Like nobody knows as much about energy as Bitcoiners do, right?
I've never spent so many hours. I never thought I'd read so much jargony bullshit about the grid. Yeah. And how it works ever in my life. I had no reason to care.
But this is the place to see it, right? Because like, kind of like that, your margin is my opportunity. It's like your unused GPU or your stranded resource, like energy resource is my opportunity. Right. Yeah. In kind of the same way, like I'm not as familiar with the numbers for GPUs and stuff. Right. But I know that I'm sure that they're not being run at peak capacity. Right. Like I know that a lot of people are running them all the time, but it's mostly that they're just buying them up. Right. Like the reason why NVIDIA stock is going to the moon. Right. Is because everybody's buying their GPUs. But maybe the idle time on that is like 10, 20, 30%, probably more. Right. But like
probably way higher. Yeah.
In the same way that like Uber and Lyft and all those guys have been talking about this for years, of that like people purchase cars and 92% of the time or whatever, they're just idly sitting in a parking space, right? Yeah. Is that if you like automate the car, if you give it an autonomous driver, right? And just allow it brings you to your destination and then it goes off and then it just taxis people around, it can be used 100% of the time, right? Yeah. And so in that same way that you're doing that, you can do the same thing with GPUs. But the thing you need is a monetization orchestration mechanism, right? So like a marketplace for these GPUs, ability for people to pay you at the time that you use them, not have these debt relationships and all that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. And so like that's the big like unlock here, right?
That's so interesting because like the idle resource problem isn't a get everybody to do it. It's it's a coordination problem. It's a coordination problem. But the crazy element, and that's like really what Uber and Airbnb and these things have unlocked, is how do you coordinate between the idle resource and the person who needs the resource? But one of the interesting things about, because we're talking about specifically a space of computational resources that don't have that meat space sort of finality, or that, like, you know, like you can simply prevent someone from getting into your Airbnb, and, like, you know, it's a physical thing, it's a physical resource with the car. You don't have that same protection. You don't have that same dynamic in the digital space. And even worse is you have a credit-based payment mechanism that is pull-based, which means that you have a permanently spent and irreversible resource with a never permanently received and reversible monetization mechanism or capital exchange.
Precisely.
So your feedback mechanism is wildly out of balance in one direction. And when we're talking about performing the use of these resources, I mean, just like you said at the very beginning of this thing, is that you could wake up and expend $20,000 in resources by accident, but just because somebody abused your API, is when you have scaled it to execute on those resources that fast and that iteratively, that you could burn through that amount of capital, you're also multiplying the cost of using the credit instrument. Like it's literally an exponential, like all of the problems of the credit card industry just got exponentially worse, and they're only going to continue to get exponentially worse as people figure out how to use these tools. And this becomes more of the actual economy, as the GPU resource essentially becomes a critical piece of all of the things that we do, which is probably going to be really fucking fast that actually happens. And
this is the thing to think about, right? Is that, like, you don't see it right now because, like, spam filters are like still relatively effective about this stuff. Mm-hmm. But just like think, like, same time next year or the year after, you're going to be able to reliably pass basically any spam filter at all. That's supposed to be like, oh, hey, this is like a human versus not a human or whatever, right?
And the spam filters are already a pain in the ass for humans.
Yeah.
I punch in those captures sometimes. I get it wrong like 3 times. I'm like, what the hell is this thing?
Yeah.
Like,
and the thing to think about for it, right, is like, why are they doing these spam filters for this stuff or whatever, right? It's because if you get access to my resource and you're a bot or whatever, and then you start like spamming me, or then you start like abusing my GPT access or abusing my Claude access or whatever I'm using, right? Mm-hmm. Then that's going to cost me an enormous amount of money, right? But if I can pass along all of the costs that I'm incurring to the user as they use it, right? I don't care who the user is. I don't care if you're an agent. I don't care if you're a bot, right? Because you're paying.
KYC just becomes redundant. Like, yeah.
Well, so like this is not like a bypass around KYC laws, sorry, but it's like, think about it conceptually of like why.
I mean, like the goal, like the purpose that KYC serves is kind of becomes redundant.
Yeah, it's like, well, why do I need to know your address and who you are and those kinds of things? The reason why is because we're entering a debt relationship, potentially, where you give me money and you could take it back 30 days from now or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And at the time that you take it back, I need to be able to follow up with you, go that sort of stuff, know who you are so that if you show up again, then I don't do that or whatever, right? Yeah. But like, at the time that I'm incurring the cost, you're passing it to me. And so insofar as people are using my service, it is always in the black, right? Yeah. That just creates an entirely different paradigm, right? Where you don't have to have a debt relationship. Like, I don't have to know anything about my user except for the fact that they paid me, right?
So crazy.
Yeah.
So this starts when?
This starts very soon. So it's the entire month of July, right? And so like
month of July. Okay.
Yeah, July 1st through the end of July, and you can join in at any point. Like, you know, we're always going to be helping out. Like, I really want to see like the people who don't know how to code, like coming in and like trying to participate in this stuff, and like me, other mentors, guys who are going to be there are all there to help you, right? In terms of like the thing with Bitcoin, and I think with AI generally, and just generally speaking, like there's kind of this. I mean, this quote that occurs to me, right, from Stephen Pressfield's book, The Lionsgate, where they're talking about the type of people who they want to join, right? And so they're saying like, hey, I want I want somebody who, when I say like a hole needs to be dug, it's like, I am a spade. We need a soldier. I am a soldier. We need a fireman. I am a fireman. Like I have no ideology. I have no like commitment to this. I have no ego. I am like the epitome of service. Like, and I exist for one purpose, which is to build on behalf of others, right? And the response is like, there aren't any people like that, right? And the guy who's speaking, right, says like, there will be, right? And I think that that's something that I know you've been doing some like kind of exploration on this thing. I know John Ballas has been doing the same thing, right? Of that, like encountering Bitcoin and seeing the way that it kind of like organizes things, right? Changes you and makes you recognize a lot of these things and makes you a better person, makes you these things or whatever. Like a lot of people had this experience, right? Where like encountering this has like said, okay, well, like this finite, perfect version of money, it's not perfect, right? But like this very, very good version of money, recognizing some of the defaults of the fiat system, it's like made you better as you do this thing. Like, I think that AI is going to be exactly the same way, right? Where it's like, as people encounter AI and as people start using it and as all the orchestration is done by like Bitcoin as these things, we're going to see Bitcoin expand throughout the rest of the economy, right? It's going to kind of infect everything. And like the same way that it's like, hey, there aren't any people like that, like there will be, right? When it comes to Bitcoiners, right? Of like, hey, there aren't people who want to like pay for things in Bitcoin or whatever, right? It's like, there will be, because everyone is going to run into this problem. Everyone already is running into this problem, right? Like this is the thing that Bitcoin clearly solves, right?
Man, dude, we should probably end it here. We're getting a little bit late. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up? I mean, I could probably go for a while.
Yeah, no, I mean,
know you have other work to do.
No, on the AI thing or whatever, I'm just like, I'm so excited for this, right? Just because like the thing that we've been talking about for the last like, what is this, like almost like over an hour, right? Is that like there's a clear and present problem that AI is facing that Bitcoin is a very, very, very good solution for. And
it's a clear and present solution. Like,
exactly. Right. And the thing that I'm super excited about for this is that the reaction that I think a lot of Bitcoiners get when we try to talk about the benefits of Bitcoin is like, show me, right? Yeah. Show me people using. This is why El Salvador was so huge, right? Of like, show me merchant adoption. Okay, like Bitcoin Beach showed you merchant adoption. They showed you the way to do it. They showed you that if you get rid of the price volatility and you just allow people to use Bitcoin, and the experience they have is just like using dollars for this stuff in terms of the price stability and allows them to make economic calculations, it works. And so now everyone says, okay, that works, and we're going to start applying it over here, and you start seeing it scale out. That's exactly what's going to happen through this hackathon with AI, is that we encounter these AI companies and we go to all these like different AI teams. And then they say, hey, we have this clear and present problem with monetization. And then we say, okay, Bitcoin fixes this. And they say, show me. And we have a suite of projects, people building on this stuff. We've developed the L402 specification, which only like formalized became a special specification like 2 weeks ago or so, right? Of like, you know, formalizing that relationship and formalizing that interaction and stuff, right? Of like having this be the standard that people interact with, is that this is going to be our chance for being like, hey, like Bitcoin fixes this, and it is fixing. Bitcoin is fixing this.
Yeah.
You know?
Bitcoin fixed here. Look, see
right?
it. Yeah. That's awesome, dude. How do I and everyone else stay up on this? Are you going to be
all over
constantly streaming this on Twitter? And what do you got?
Constantly pushing through Twitter. There's going to be a Discord for organizing like the hackers and doing like meeting teams and all that kind of stuff. And then
am I following you on Twitter? What's your Twitter handle?
At Kody Low, KODY.
Okay, that's easy.
Yeah.
All right.
And
I'll
then
have that
like,
in the show notes. Where else? Yeah.
Fedi and Stack are organizers for it, and so we're going to be pumping out content for it continuously as we do this. And then, and then it's like we're doing it through Bolt.fun platform. So anybody who's involved with Legends of Lightning and Shock the Web and those things, like I think you know those, right? So like concept.
Nice, dude. This was a wonderful conversation. This was awesome. I am so jazzed. I hate this. I do this before I go to bed, and then I can't sleep. I can't fucking sleep. I get so jazzed about some of this stuff, and I'm like, oh my God, what's going to be? And I got to fucking play with ChatGPT-4 and figure out how to plug in that new model. I want to, I'm going to bug you about those prompts. And also, I'm probably going to, we're in that Telegram group. And I'll be bugging you about the tools that you use, because I want to kind of get into more videos specifically on that. And I want to see, I'm just so excited to see how these apply. And I'm going to be following this shit like crazy this month. I am very stoked. Okay.
Yeah.
Dude, Cody, Thank you for coming on the show, and for making this work in the craziness that was today, and trying to get this organized. And maybe we started 20 minutes late, maybe no big deal, you know. Thank you, man.
Yep. Anytime.
Yep. All right, man. I'll catch you on Telegram.
Cool.
All right. Later.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I still, like I said, it's been a couple of days now, and I'm still just, I can't get this one out of my head. A huge thank you to Cody for coming on the show. We will be talking about this again, especially after the hackathon is over. No doubt I will be having him back on to kind of go over a lot of the projects. If you want to participate in this, know the link will be in the show notes. It is right down there in the description of the show. So definitely explore it, especially if you are a builder. And if you're just highly technically illiterate and you're not quite a builder, understand that you might actually be now, because AI can write code for you. And so maybe you can build something that you don't think. So if you have a great idea, reach out to people, find a community, see who is building, and work with somebody, because this is the time to build. This is where all the opportunity is, right? When massive change is in the process of happening, and I think we are seeing this happen. And I actually think, I'll talk about this in the guys. I'm having a guys take on Bitcoin Audible. So if you're a listener of that show, stay tuned for that. I want to have that out this week, and this will take this idea that we covered in this show and kind of run with it. Because I think what we've seen with Twitter recently, with the rate limiting and trying to blue check or verify everybody, I actually think this is not unrelated. And we're kind of witnessing this change, this shift away from the open internet, because APIs, an API call costs money. And I think AI fundamentally changes this relationship, and I think Lightning is the solution. At least I can't see how it just doesn't. These puzzle pieces don't just fit snugly together. So I'm going to expand on it, and kind of run with it in that episode of Bitcoin Audible. So stay tuned for that one. Check out that show, and subscribe over there if you haven't. And of course, subscribe to AI Unchained. Subscribe to this YouTube channel so you don't miss all the many great conversations and shows we have on the way. There are a ton of links down in the description. I think I saved like 8 or 9 or something just from this conversation. So definitely check those out if you haven't, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. I'm Guy Swan. This is AI Unchained, and until next time, everybody, take it easy, guys.